Good morning, everyone. I call Committee of Supply Section 8 to order. We're meeting today to continue consideration of the estimates of the Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure. I now recognize the Minister to move a vote.
Thank you, Chair. I move vote number 45, resolved that a sum not exceeding $1,020,919,000 be granted to His Majesty to defray the expenses of the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure Ministry operations to 31st March 2024.
Thank you, Minister. I now recognize the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and glad to have an opportunity to ask just a few questions about one of my favorite topics, which is public transportation. So I'll just start with a little anecdote, as I'm inclined to do often. So my son is getting ready to go to UVic in the fall, and has been spending a few days checking out the campus, checking out classes. And the first day that he did this a couple months ago, he came to Victoria on the commuter bus from Shawnigan, which is a $10 bus ride, and then was able to purchase a day-long bus pass for every bus in the CRD, $5. So one bus ride, $10. Bus rides all over the CRD, $5. And he was so delighted with the ability to get anywhere he needed to within the CRD by bus. He came home aglow because this is so different from the experience that he's had growing up in Cowichan. Looking for work for his gap year, he was really limited to either Shawnigan Lake or Mill Bay because the bus schedule to Duncan really made it impossible for him to be able to be getting to and from work without a car. And the commuter bus system really also couldn't serve his needs. So it's great to hear yesterday about the improvements and the rapid buses and all of the really great investments into the transit system here in the Capital Regional District. And then you leave the Capital Regional District, and it is a bus desert. It's not an oasis. And the argument that often happens, and I was transit chair for a while at the CVRD, is, well, we just don't have the ridership. But we know with public transit, we know that until the system is reliable, accessible, easy to use, there when you need it, you won't get the ridership because people can't rely on a system that isn't there for them, that doesn't meet their needs. And so we're in this relentless chicken and egg. And so I guess my first question to the minister really is, it's 8 in the morning. There's one person in Cowichan Valley who needs to get to Victoria, and there's one person in Victoria who needs to get to the Cowichan Valley. Neither owns a car. What do?
Minister.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the member. I know we've talked before about the Cowichan Valley commuter. It's a relatively new service. It came into existence not too long after this government was elected and began increasing its schedule and service before the pandemic, and it had a rough go during the pandemic, as bus service did generally. I believe we have now restored about 4/5 of the pre-pandemic service in terms of frequency of the Cowichan to Victoria service. We've also introduced one from Cowichan to Nanaimo, a brand new service that was introduced last year. We're working on an inter-community bus strategy that is not just about Vancouver Island, but around the province. We were one of the provinces that introduced the recovery of service routes to about 85 or 90% of where they were when Greyhound vacated British Columbia. So we regularly compare the strategies of other provinces, and British Columbia is much further ahead than most of the jurisdictions across Canada, who have now all completely lost Greyhound service. I won't go too far down that road because I know she didn't specifically ask about Greyhound. But what I would say is that the Cowichan commuter goes from one separate, distinct regional district to another. The BC Transit serves both communities as a Crown corporation. They are continually engaging riders to look at recovering demand for service. I will expect that additional service will be added on the basis of that demand management for the service and continuing to understand ridership patterns. That's how any bus route and schedule is really determined in any transit system. But I would also ask the member to maybe recognize that the Cowichan Valley commuter is not a typical route. It's over 65 kilometers in duration. It is a much longer commute between distinct regional districts. In a way, it's a little bit like the West Coast Express in Vancouver, which costs about $7 or $8 per trip, depending on your end destination. If you buy a monthly pass, if you're a regular commuter from Cowichan to Victoria, the savings are significantly better. It would be about $5 a trip, which is not bad for about 2 hours of commuting, an hour each way on the bus. So we're going to continue to engage riders, see if there's additional demand to restore service and then add service. We're going to continue to evaluate where it is that commuters want to stop at because it is an express service. And we're going to continue to add service like it throughout BC Transit's system. We've added inter-community BC Transit service in the southern interior, in the Okanagan, in northern British Columbia, and on Vancouver Island. And I know many of these services are in the member's constituency, so I'm sure she's pleased that the Nanaimo Cowichan Express came into existence in 2022, and BC Transit is supported by the budget that is under discussion, under estimates, to continue to deliver on new initiatives and new innovations and continue to engage with ridership to see what the patterns are. Things are different after the pandemic, there's no question about it. Commutes to work are different, work arrangements are different for a lot of people in the workforce, so all that has to be taken into account as we prioritize the deployment of resources to get more people to use public transit and give them opportunities to make their commute on a public transit option.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the question I actually asked was it's not specifically about the Cowichan Valley commuter bus, which I'm well aware. It actually existed before this government. It existed before 2017. That's one piece of a puzzle, right? But that's not regular transit between regions. Now let's compare Souk, similar distance between Souk and Victoria, 38 buses a day. So when the minister indicates, well, that's a different region, and I think that this is actually the issue that we have to solve, is that when it comes to public transit, we have to look at the fact that over 20,000 cars a day are coming over the Malahat, that there is a huge amount of connection between Cowichan and the Capital Regional District in terms of the number of people who come to work or to school over that Malahat every single day. And so the thinking that is going to get us to different outcomes when it comes to transit on southern Vancouver Island, which is what I think we have to be thinking about, is stop thinking like, here's the CRD ends, and we no longer consider that as part of our thinking when it comes to public transit, because that's the CVRD, and that is a different realm. We know that's not the case. Tens of thousands of people every day cross between the realms, keep economic activity going, and are an important part of this. And then there's a whole bunch of people who can't. Because if you don't have a car at 8 in the morning and you're in Cowichan, you can't get to the CRD. And if you're at 8 in the morning and you're in the CRD, you can't get to Cowichan by bus. I figured out a few ways. You can take the Mill Bay Ferry. You have to get to Saanich and then take the ferry. But then the bus schedule doesn't align with the ferry schedule. So you're going to be spending a lot of time waiting at Mill Bay Ferry Terminal where there's nothing there until maybe a bus comes quite a bit later. So that's one option. And the other option is you could take Harbour Air. You could go to Vancouver Harbour and then to Maple Bay. I honestly, I'm not being facetious. There is no way between these two regions. And I think that that can be solved by thinking differently about these regions, not separating them when it comes to transit planning. Bring the Cowichan Valley Regional District, the Nanaimo Regional District to the table for South Island transit planning. Recognize that these regions are deeply connected, that people are moving between them every single day, and start making public transportation planning oriented towards how do we keep people moving on southern Vancouver Island in an effective, efficient, affordable way. And I think that we could get to a lot of solutions that way. Because honestly, unless the minister has another answer for me, and I'll ask him again, maybe his staff knows something that I don't know. 8 in the morning, if you don't have a car and you're in one of these two regions and want to get to the other, how do you do it?
As I said,
Minister.
Chair, thank you. To the member again, we are in a unique situation. We're recovering from a pandemic. BC Transit has done an excellent job compared to any other transportation authority in North America by all comparables. Ridership is coming back, but we're looking at it on a route-by-route basis. Those that seek to commute from Cowichan for work or other purposes to the capital region, generally downtown Victoria, are part of an engagement. Ridership is still not recovered very significantly, but I know that BC Transit is looking at ways to promote and add back service there. Her question is not just for me, though, and I do want to say this. The Victoria Regional Transit Commission, on this end of the journey that she speaks of between Cowichan and Victoria, is composed of mayors and elected councillors. Their job under the legislation is to decide on routes and services. So I would suggest that the members should, not just communicate with me, but also communicate with people who are elected to represent the capital region, who decide on where they would like to deploy new and additional service. People are looking at where commuting patterns are. They're looking at where the biggest environmental benefit can be had. Obviously, one of the priority decisions on service expansion that was recently announced and made was between the West Shore and downtown. And this will literally take hundreds of vehicles off the same highway that the member speaks of. Will actually have an appreciable difference in reducing greenhouse gases and is a high impact, efficient investment that elected members of local government made. Because don't forget, those that pay fares are local constituents of mayors and councillors. Ratepayers, through their property tax, contribute a significant amount of funding. So I applaud and support the integration between different regional districts, and we have lots of examples of where that happens. But there is a different set of taxpayers in the Cowichan than there is in the capital region. They've obviously agreed that a service between the two communities, the two regional districts, is important. What they now have to agree upon is a strategy, and I would suggest that it's best informed by data analytics and engaging with users, which is happening through BC Transit, to get that in a priority list that is considered alongside other investments that are needed. The reason why Souk has had enhanced service is because our government invested significantly on Highway 14, and there was significant demand from Souk. So the expanded service there is excellent. It's made sure that our highway investments are going to go a lot further because we're not going to clog it up with cars. We're going to shift people to transit. We want to do the same thing on the Malahat, and we want to build upon the service that we have. So I guess at the end of the day, I'm asking for a bit of patience from the member. We've gone through a pandemic. We're rebuilding service everywhere in the province, and to inform a decision to add back or enhance service pre-pandemic on the Cowichan commuter, we're going to continue to rely on management and elected officials that are our partners to collaborate on making that a priority.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I guess this will be my final question. Thank you to the official opposition for the opportunity. Didn't get an answer on the 8 a.m. Trying to get between. But I think in response to the minister's comments, yes, obviously there are other tables involved here, but there's a need for leadership from the province. The role of the province is really to have the bird's eye view on this and to recognize that the regions are going to be focused on themselves. The province has a role to play to make sure that as the minister says, post-pandemic public transit world really recognizes how important it's going to be to create accessible, reliable public transit. The difference between the Souk and the Cowichan is the price as well, right? It's a couple dollars to catch the bus from Souk to Victoria. It's $10 one way from Cowichan. It's $20, and I know there's a monthly pass. But so, as an experiment, put a bunch of buses on for a couple months, make them very low cost, and see how many people choose to ride them. Like, that's how you're going to collect data about the willingness or interest in ridership. But having the system as it exists right now, which is very limited and very expensive, is not a good indication of what the desire for public transit is between these two regions, because it's inaccessible on a number of levels. The timing, the cost, the inability to go in either direction at any time other than once a day. So I just think that there's a real opportunity for out-of-the-box thinking that says, how can we create the conditions that most people who want to access public transit actually can do it? Because right now, those conditions don't exist between Cowichan and the CRD. And I think this is solvable. I'll just end with, if very briefly, if the minister could just speak to the decision to wait really to the last moment on the ENN Railway to come out with the province making an announcement about funding going to First Nations around potential next steps, and just so people can understand what informed the decision to wait right to the last minute. And that would be my last question.
Minister.
Thank you very much. So just on the preamble point there about Cowichan commuter, and just to maybe offer some final comments to the members' questions there. Take away the suggestions she's made, because I think there is a balancing act between looking at demand and not losing sight of potential demand. So I think she makes a good case there, and there's lots of examples of where one needs to be certain about what the data is actually telling you and what might be missing. But for sure, demand is down. There's no question about it on the Cowichan commuter post-pandemic. Work patterns have simply changed. There is less demand right now, but we want to make sure that there isn't some kind of suppressed demand that could come back. But the member has to concede that there may not be such a thing. But I will commit to working with her and the BC Transit executive. There may be some information she doesn't have that BC Transit has, and we'll commit to sharing that as well. Certainly we want to strengthen public transit everywhere, which we're doing in most communities, and I think we're in a good place overall in our transit system. We have some communities serviced by BC Transit that are at 110, 115% of their pre-pandemic ridership levels, which is extraordinary. We have some that are still in the phase of building back, and we'll continue to work on that. In terms of Island Rail, I want to stress that our government did not wait until the last minute. In fact, we grew a little bit tired of waiting for the federal government, who, by the way, is the respondent to the court action that was sought originally by the Nanoose Bay Indian Band. We expected the federal government, especially given that this Island Rail Corridor was an Article of Confederation that united the island of Vancouver Island with British Columbia, that they would take an interest, given that it was divested, given that they used to operate a passenger rail service here until 2011 and pulled Via Rail out of here, given that they're making rail investments in other provinces. We begged their attention and begged them to have an adequate response and to understand that this corridor, even if it's not important or feasible today or next year or the year thereafter, will be important again to Vancouver Island, especially given that we only have one north-south corridor, which is the Island Highway, available to us to connect different parts of the island. And especially because we just went through the atmospheric river, and we know that there are economic costs coming from that. So the federal government did not want to lead an engagement. They did not want to work with regional districts. They did not want to work with First Nations people directly. They preferred the province to lead that exercise. So we didn't wait for them. We got involved. So there was an 18-month response period. We spent 16 months doing public engagement, the province. We tried to get the federal government to attend. Sometimes they did, most times they didn't. We tried to get them to come up with an investment plan, and we said, we have some ambitions here and we would like to do it as well. We tried to get them to lend support and capacity building to the Island Corridor Federation, and that didn't happen, unfortunately. What they did come around to, though, because we did a number of economic studies about what the future of this corridor can and should look like, is they conceded that in order to support passenger rail service being returned, it must have an economic base. It must have economic activity that moves freight around Vancouver Island. And we shared all the data with them that we have about travel levels and commercial traffic on the Island Highway. And we said, at this point, with 99% of truck movement responsible for goods movement on Vancouver Island, this corridor has a role. A population of 800,000 now, which will surely go north of 1 million by a decade to 2 decades from now, is only growing in importance. In fact, Nanaimo and Langford are two of the fastest growing cities in the province of BC, which puts them in the top fast growing communities in Canada. So that's the next steps. And I think at the end of the day, the federal government aligns with our values as a province around taking reconciliation seriously. And there were some objections that are understandable from First Nations communities saying, look, this corridor was forcibly seized from reserve territories that were granted, over a century ago, and essentially confiscated and bisected. And yes, trains did rumble by for 3/4 of a century and provided no employment, no economic benefit, no connection to goods and services. And that was wrong, and that is wrong. And it further blocks economic development now because most of the island corridor is adjacent to the highway. So the disruption of the track from access egress to adjacent business opportunities on their territory is what was the genesis of that court decision. So we've decided in the 4% of areas where there was confiscations from First Nations, we will return those. And we will continue the discussion and the planning for what goods movement will look like and passenger rail service will look like when we have some of the planning that is additionally needed. We can't just restore Via Rail. It wasn't that good. It wasn't that good. The track condition has significantly deteriorated, so the cost will be very large. And the federal government has to be a partner, quite frankly, in restoring it. We're watching very closely what they're doing in Ontario and Quebec. which is there's a bit of a rail renaissance going there, which is excellent, and those opportunities exist in BC, and we want to make that case. But Via Rail, when it suspended service, it moved 40,000 passengers a year. Okay, TransLink moves 400,000 a day. BC Ferries moves 21 million passengers a year. So it was an insignificant portion of people movement when it was wound up. So we want to get back to something that's going to be much more effective, and it could be that the sum of the parts of the Island Rail Corridor are greater than the whole that was useful at the end of the 19th century into the mid-20th century. Nanaimo, north-south orientation, rail, could have a significantly different official community plan that's organized around transit. I can give other examples in the Cowichan as well. So what we wanted to do was make sure that the corridor was not lost, and that the negotiations going forward are done on a reconciliation basis, acknowledging that First Nations have suffered harm and no economic benefit over the years, and that a decision to restore rail service, or not, depending on what segment we're talking about, will be done on a respectful government-to-government basis. The federal government has to be there. So I outlined that. I thank the member for the opportunity to raise the question, and I apologize for the long answer, but it was a very detailed 16 months of intense activity that our ministry had to take the leadership role because the federal government just didn't step up, and nothing would have happened if we didn't have a good examination of a railway that we don't even own and never have. But that's where we are, and I think there is a fantastic future for this corridor, and I'm very optimistic that it will provide benefits to everybody, not just a few that live on Vancouver Island in the future.
Member for West Vancouver Sea to Sky.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I'll certainly take this opportunity to continue to talk about regions that are fast growing. And I'd like to talk about the Sea to Sky a little bit, where I think we understand that the Minister mentioned in Nanaimo some of the areas there growing quickly. Certainly the Sea to Sky, Squamish growing at 22% over the last census, Whistler growing to 18%, and Pemberton growing at 34%, which is, I think, in fact, the fastest growing community in virtually in this country. But and I also was interested to hear the Minister speak to the idea of enhancing the opportunity to connect communities through BC Transit. And I'm sure the Minister is very familiar with the initiatives that were generated out of the 25-year Sea to Sky Transit Futures Plan back in 2017 to connect the Lowat Nation with the community of Pemberton, with the community of Whistler, with the community of Squamish, Pinecrest and Black Tusk in between, and then down through Britannia Beach, Porto Cove, Lions Bay, and into the TransLink system. So this has been an initiative that these local governments have come together on over the course of the last probably 4 or 5 years. They have signed a memorandum of understanding between the local governments, the regional district, the municipalities, and the First Nations, with a proposed model for governance in terms of a commission model, which the Minister's probably familiar that I have forwarded a private member's bill to support that model, and a funding model that would be similar to the funding model for the CRD and TransLink. Now, historically, the Minister's predecessor rejected that model, and it kept telling the members of the MOU, the signatories of the MOU, to be more creative in terms of their financial or their fiscal creativity around how to fund a service like this. I think that there's been really no change from the signatories of that MOU. They still support the idea of a transit fuel levy, and albeit at a much more modest level than what is proposed in what is currently in place in Metro Vancouver or the Capital Regional District. So my question to the Minister at this point is, what movement has been made? What commitment can the government make towards the creation of a regional transit service, which frankly doesn't exist? And I had heard There's bits and pieces. I listened to the member from Cowichan speak to it around the need, around growth, and around the fact that you can't get from one place to the other unless you want to fly Harbor Air, I think she said, or drive. Now we don't have the Harbor Air option, but we don't have a ferry option either. Really, there's no option but your thumb or a private vehicle, and to either connect to Metro Vancouver or to connect up to Whistler. We have a small service, a limited service in from Pemberton to Whistler, supported by the Lowot Nation, supported by the regional district, supported by the village of Pemberton. And it was better served before Greyhound pulled out of town. And there's a real demand, a real consistent request of the ministry to support a regional transit service. And perhaps the minister could provide me with an update on what that initiative looks like today, and whether we can expect to see some support for it from the province in the near future.
Minister.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the member for the question. And I know that he has a long-standing interest in this, and that this is important to his constituents. We've been working during the pandemic on different options around intercommunity service on the Sea to Sky corridor. We thought we had a proposal that elected officials up and down the corridor would participate in and match provincial dollars to fund, and they have some objections, so we're still in the process of arriving at a plan that will meet the needs and agreement of everybody. I think It's not a back to the drawing board situation. We have some baselines about what the service should look like. We have a number of private operators who are operating from Vancouver all the way to Whistler now too, so there's a healthy amount of competition and service that wasn't there previously, so that's good to see transportation options increasing on the corridor. BC Transit obviously has service areas and inter-community connections between Pemberton and Whistler and Squamish and Whistler as well. They have discussions about offering transit service there. They're also making investments in infrastructure for supporting an expanded transit service there that will be owned by the province that we can plan for the future around. And I don't want to get into too many details about that because it does involve discussions around land acquisitions and things like that that are best left off the record. So what I will say is that I've also participated in some discussions with the Member of Parliament for the Sea to Sky region, who has expressed some confidence that the federal government would like to participate on a 2.0 proposal of the pilot that we discussed in 2022. We did a travel demand study to support that, and so I know that the mayors are very interested in this, people who are living on the corridor, the business community at the resort municipality of Whistler for getting their employees to and from the workplace. And we're certainly interested in moving quickly on where discussions left off. I've told some of the mayors, though, quite frankly, service can be implemented a lot quicker than legislation can be changed. So it's fine to talk about governance and those sorts of goals that they have for the corridor, but I'm more interested as the minister to talk about service at this point in time that will inform those kinds of decisions. And the reason why a pilot is so critical is it will inform how we make a service, a new service, connecting all the communities in Sea to Sky corridor financially sustainable for the long term, and how we build it up and have it under part of the BC Transit service for residents in that region.
I ask the minister to move the vote.
Motion.
My apology.
A motion. Okay. This is okay? Yeah? Finished now? Okay. All right. Honorable Chair, I move that the committee rise and report progress and ask leave to sit again.
The question is that the committee rise, report progress, and seek leave to sit again. Those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Oppose? Motion is carried. Thank you, members. This committee stands adjourned. you.